Look at my cute outfit. Hello fam, welcome back to Faida's Flow. I want to apologize in advance if you can hear some lawn mowing that my neighbor is partaking in. He does it every single weekend. I don't know why he thinks grass grows that quickly, but okay, so I'm just apologizing in advance. But this has definitely been something that I've wanted to talk about for a while, and I guess I just felt like, especially within like the last couple of weeks, that this was something that I'd been sitting on, sort of like wrestling with in my mind. There's like a couple of stuff that I feel like I want to talk about in this video because I feel like it sort of doesn't stay within like one pocket of, I guess, my life. It sort of moves throughout other things, and I felt like I wanted to talk about that here. The privileges in my life that I have been able to have living and growing up here in a Western country like Australia. I was a lot younger and I didn't really have a lot of insight and awareness, but then, you know, like as I've grown up, I've realized that, you know, being a black queer woman, there are certain spaces and circumstances where I don't fully feel welcomed, or, you know, I feel like there are certain obstacles that I have to sort of work through to get to where I want to get to. And if I'm even able to reach those spaces, you know, am I ever fully like welcomed? I feel like when I think about privilege, sometimes I don't realize that certain things are human rights and people should be able to have access to, like, you know, clean water, education, you know, a roof over their house, clothes to be able to have, and to be able to live their life, being able to express, you know, whether it's their gender or their sexuality, free from discrimination or oppression. But unfortunately, there comes like this burden of realizing that as much as those are human rights, not everyone has the privilege to be able to access them in a way that feels safe, in a way that feels like they are entitled to that because that is their right. You know, as a human being, this is the level of dignity that you are, you know, allowed to have. When I think about, I guess, coming to Australia as a refugee, I think that sometimes like there is like this kind of narrative, and this isn't particularly around like being a refugee, but like being a traveler or a person that has come from another land to live in the better life, or, you know, being able to have a life free from persecution and arrest or harm or any kind of societal, cultural, and I guess political harm, which is a very real and scary experience for many people around the world. But I feel like sometimes, you know, from the spaces that I've been in and conversations that I've been around, there's been this kind of thing around not being able to acknowledge the full picture. What I mean by that is like, well, I was able to come to this country and be able to live in this country because of the colonisation of Aboriginal land. And I think that sometimes that sort of really important part, like really big important part of the conversation, gets left out. You know, I've been able to live a life within this box, free from the experiences that Aboriginal people have to face in this country. Even though, you know, my identity is within the black diaspora of, you know, African people, it still doesn't in any way exist within the same space that black First Nations people have to experience in Australia. It's like hard because you're kind of sitting there, and I don't even know if guilt is the right word, but like you're sitting there with all these emotions of just sadness. Once that truth kind of comes around, when you allow that sense of like information to exist, you can't really go back from that. And I think that that is a truth that I live with. I learn how I continue to advocate for the things that I'm passionate about around, you know, anti-racism, talking about like inclusion and access, like even within like my art, you know, whether it's music, whether it's in theater or whatever it is, whatever spaces I occupy, it's always sort of an underlying sort of current that we exist, we participate, and we work and we live in this country off of that. And with that, you have to be able to practice a sense of consciousness in using your capacity to actually do shit. That's been something that like I'm continuing to move with. Sort of leading off from that, from also my last video that I made, I was talking about how growing up here in the West, in this country, I've been able to access so many resources in terms of well-being and mental health. Expanding on that, you know, lifestyle, being able to have the privilege of, you know, choosing whether or not I want to go to school. And I mean, I don't mean like primary school, high school. I kind of had no say in that. I mean, you know, me deciding to leave university when I was like 20. No, I don't remember how old I was. But the fact that I had the choice, and don't get me wrong, like having, you know, African parents who have fought tooth and nail to get you to the point that you are, to be able to have, you know, again, the better life that they never had. You know, it was never a decision that I was able to make lightly, or that, you know, there isn't like this continuation of like constant pressure of like, but I still have to be successful and I still have to succeed. It's more the fact that there are certain liberties that I am able to have because things are at just such a touch point. Things around food and the plethora of just stuff that I'm able to have. The little things like, you know, these 5-minute showers, driving to and fro just to get anything. And don't get me wrong, like that's not me saying that like those luxuries don't exist back home. They do, but again, context being like where I come from and like my people, again, we come from the village. Like it's the lifestyle is so drastically different. When I hear about how my folks are doing back home and the constant issues around health and needing, you know, financial support and wanting to go to school but not being able to go to school because they don't have money, and knowing that like HEX isn't necessarily something that they can just tap into and whip out their concession card whenever they need to buy, you know, that subsidized, you know, medication that they need for something as small or as big as they come. I used to sort of be, I think, willfully ignorant about it because it sits so wrong. It sits so wrong in me that is a reality that is. That relationship of the wider scope of how, I guess, the West have been able to cultivate spaces for themselves to be able to profit off of others and to create, I guess, worlds apart and label them as being less than, when in fact a lot of that ideology is very much constructed, and unfortunately it leaves a lot of devastation. And I think that sort of like comes to like my third point, which is this very unfortunate reality that I, you know, as a Black queer woman, I given the privilege of being able to feel like even existing as a queer person is a reality. It's a human right, yet it's not a privilege that everyone is afforded, right? How wild is that? That I even have to say that, like, that's just so, it's just so, it's just so sad. Colonization has been such a huge impact on the relationship that, you know, Africans have with their identities. And I'm not saying like all Africans, I'm not trying to put everyone in a box, but particularly for me, like just recently, I just read online that Uganda had made it illegal for LGBTQIA plus people to identify, making that like a crime. This isn't like new news to me. Like I'm not sitting here like, oh my god, I'm so shocked. Like, because I've known how incredibly scary and terrifying it is to be a member of the rainbow family back home, because of how incredibly damaging a lot of what colonization has done to the identities and histories and cultures of people who existed as they were, to now just have everything completely erased and also transformed into this really warped idea of reality. Don't get me wrong, like don't get twisted. Like the West ain't all what it's cracked up to be when it comes to being like, yay, we're all like, we're all just like loving each other and it's great. Really, there's still so much violence. There's still so much to be afraid of. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that, because, you know, I'm not trying to make anyone feel afraid to exist. I believe in our truth, but I think that it would be incredibly naive and reckless of me not to acknowledge the fact that there's still a lot of stigma and a lot of people who don't want, you know, us to exist, aren't trying to create spaces that make us feel seen. But in saying that, it's still worlds apart. I don't take it lightly that I've been able to live here, and just the thought of being able to love someone who is the same sex as me, or just to be able to see like same-sex people or non-binary or queer folk out in public, just out in public, without like the idea that someone's going to come out with a stone, do something really horrible. So never helpful to just sort of sit in it and just be like, well, where there is space to be able to use what you have to give, I think that matters too. You can appreciate the capacity to be able to have opportunity, more comfortability to achieve and to live and to, you know, thrive. But there's still that gap, and I think that with all that you have, there's still that opportunity to sort of dive into that and give. Having this channel was a really important part of me setting that up, because I felt like I do have a lot that I am able to share, and I want to be able to do that here. Yeah, this one was important to talk about. So that's that. Thank you for clicking on the video and checking in with me, for coming through, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Thank you.